The sun over Ouagadougou does not merely shine, it judges. It beats down upon the red earth of the Sahel with a clarity that strips away illusions, leaving only the raw truth of the land. On a recent afternoon, that truth took the form of steel. 700, they stretched toward the horizon, a sea of yellow and black iron shimmering in the heat. There was no orchestra playing. No foreign dignitaries sat on velvet chairs under shaded canopies. Most notably, there was not a single blue and yellow flag of a donor nation to be seen. What if everything we were told about survival was never really there? For 60 years, the world insisted that a nation like Burkina Faso could not breathe without the oxygen of foreign credit. They said the soil was too dry, the pockets too shallow, and the people too weary to build their own future. But as those 764 engines remained cold, waiting for the command of a young captain, the silence told a different story. At that pivotal moment, Ibrahim Traore walked amongst the iron giants. He did not look for a camera. He did not wait for a nod of approval from a Western ambassador. He simply placed a hand on the cold steel of a compactor. It was a small gesture, almost private, yet it carried the weight of a century of struggle. They called it a crisis. The international reports filed in comfortable offices in Paris and Brussels described a nation on the brink of collapse. But the records show something else. They show a people who decided that the cost of a loan was far higher than the cost of a struggle. Ibrahim Traore refused to accept the script written for him. This isn't just about road construction or infrastructure. It is about the soul of a continent. It is about whether a man can look his children in the eye and tell them their home belongs to them, not to a bank 5,000 miles away. Stay with me. What comes next affects all of us. Stay with us. This is more than a headline. It is a hinge in history. If this resonates, show your support with a like, comment, or subscription. It keeps the story alive. To understand the weight of those machines, one must understand the anatomy of a beggar's bowl. For decades, the Sahel was defined by its needs. We saw the images of dust and drought, the grainy footage of grain sacks being dropped from the back of planes. This was the curated image of Burkina Faso. It was a convenient image. It justified a system where development was a gift, not a right. Infrastructure arrived in bits and pieces, a bridge here, a well there, always accompanied by a plaque expressing gratitude to a foreign partner. But these gifts came with invisible threads. Each mile of road built with aid was a mile of sovereignty signed away in interest rates and political concessions. The trigger for this sudden shift was not a single event, but a slow, painful awakening. For years, the gold moved out of the country in quiet, armored convoys, while the people remained in the dark. The state treasury was a sieve, and the national pride was a memory. When Captain Ibrahim Traore took the mantle of leadership, he inherited a house that was intentionally kept empty. The machines we see today are the result of a radical question. What happens if we stop asking for permission to exist? The numbers tell a story that the mainstream media often ignores. We are looking at an investment of billions of CFA francs, a sum that should have been impossible for a landlocked nation under the shadow of sanctions. There are no donor signatures on the purchase orders. There are no IMF consultants overseeing the distribution of these assets to the provinces. Instead, there is a quiet, methodical focus on the provinces that have been forgotten for generations. This is a scope of development that does not seek to impress a boardroom in Washington. It seeks to connect a farmer in the north to a market in the south. The impact is already being felt in the way the youth speak in the markets of the capital. There is a shift in the posture of the elders. They have seen many leaders come and go, many promises made in the heat of a campaign, only to be forgotten when the rains came. But they have never seen the steel arrive before the speech. One elderly man, sitting in the shade of a neem tree, watched the convoy pass and remarked that for the first time in 80 years, the dust smelled of hope rather than debt. The world is watching, and the air is thick with a specific kind of tension. In the corridors of power across Africa, the arrival of these 764 machines is being viewed as a threat. It is a threat because it destroys the greatest lie ever told to the African person, that you are too poor to be free. If Ibrahim Traore can line up a private army of construction equipment without a single cent of Western aid, then the excuse of every other leader on the continent evaporates. The paradox is clear. The giants of the continent, with their oil and their minerals, are still waiting for a phone call from the World Bank. Meanwhile, tiny Burkina Faso has moved the earth with its own hands. But where did the money truly come from? How does a nation under pressure find the liquid capital to bypass the global financial gatekeepers? The answer is not found in a printing press. It is found in a quiet, ruthless reclamation of what was always there. For 60 years, the gold of the Sahel was a ghost. Everyone knew it existed, but no one in the village ever saw the benefit. Traoré didn't find new wealth. He simply stopped the old wealth from leaving. As we look at these machines, we must realize they are more than tools. They are a declaration of war against the status quo. But machines require fuel. They require operators who cannot be bribed. And they require a nation that is willing to endure the cold shoulder of the international community in exchange for its dignity. The open loop is now set. The money for these machines did not come from a bank. It came from a place where for 60 years we were told nothing remained. But as the sun sets over the rows of yellow iron, a new question arises. You can build a road with steel, but you cannot feed a nation with it. A different kind of hunger is waiting, and Ibrahim Traoré knows that his greatest battle is not against the rocks in the ground, but against the dependency of the stomach. The world expects a collapse. They are waiting for the moment the fuel runs out or the parts break down. They are waiting for the young captain to realize that he has bitten off more than he can chew. But they have underestimated the power of a man who has nothing left to lose but his chains. The revelation of where this wealth was hidden is only the first shock. What comes next is a paradox that no economist could have predicted. The golden veins of the Sahel have long been a curse disguised as a blessing. For 60 years, the earth beneath Burkina Faso was treated as a hollow vault for others to plunder, a treasure chest with a lock that only turned from the outside. But the silence of the mines has been broken. When the money for those 764 machines appeared, the world looked for a foreign creditor, a hidden loan, or a secret treaty. They could not conceive of a reality where the wealth was simply taken back. Ibrahim Traoré did not find a new mountain of gold. He simply decided that the gold already being pulled from the earth would no longer board a plane for Europe without leaving its soul behind. The closure of the first loop begins in the dark, dusty tunnels where Burkinabe miners have labored for generations. Under the previous regimes, the law was a shadow. Multinational corporations operated with the freedom of kings, paying royalties that were little more than insults, while the environmental costs were left for the villagers to inherit. Ibrahim Traoré looked at these contracts and saw not legal documents, but colonial receipts. With a stroke of a pen, he did not just tax the gold, he reclaimed the sovereignty of the mineral. New regulations demanded that a significant portion of the revenue remain within the national borders, directed specifically into the sovereign fund for the support of the territory. This was not a suggestion, it was a command. Suddenly, the treasury was no longer a sieve. The liquid capital that once flowed into offshore accounts began to accumulate in Ouagadougou. This is how 764 machines are bought in cash. This is how dignity is financed. When you stop the bleeding of a nation's natural resources, the recovery is not a slow evolution. It is an explosion of possibility. The gold that once built the glittering towers of distant capitals is now building the bridges of Bobo Dioulasso. It is a transition from being a resource colony to becoming a master of one's own basement. Leave a thank you in the comments to Ibrahim Traoré, or simply thank you for hope. Each thank you carries weight. Each says, I hear this, I stand with this. Write your thank you now. The cost of this freedom, however, is not measured only in currency. As the gold stayed home, the atmosphere in the international community grew cold. The International Monetary Fund remained silent, but their silence was heavy with disapproval. Ratings agencies, those distant architects of economic reputation, began to whisper about investor risk and instability. But what they call risk, the people of the Sahel call reality. To the men and women who have lived on less than $2 a day while tons of gold left their soil, the opinion of a New York credit analyst is less than a whisper in a sandstorm. The paradox of the current situation is that the more self-sufficient Burkina Faso becomes, the more dangerous it appears to the old guard. If one nation proves that it can thrive without the suffocating embrace of foreign debt, the entire architecture of global aid begins to crumble. This is why the pressure on Traoré is not just economic, it is existential. The corporations that once owned the mines are not going quietly. They use the language of international law to threaten and the language of the market to isolate. Yet, the gold continues to shine, and for the first time, it shines for the people who walk above it. But as the pockets of the state grew heavy with the reclaimed wealth of the mines, a new shadow began to stretch across the palace. History teaches us that when a nation finds its purse, the oldest ghosts of governance begin to stir. In the past, every time wealth was centralized, the parasites followed. The middlemen, the career bureaucrats, and the professional rent seekers who have lived off the crumbs of foreign aid for decades are now looking at the gold revenue with hungry eyes. Traoré has secured the money, but can he secure the hands that touch it? When the treasury is full, the enemy is no longer across the ocean. The enemy sits at the same table. This is the beginning of a third loop, one that moves from the mines to the corridors of the ministries. The capital is now available, but the system through which it flows is still haunted by the habits of the old world. Corruption in Africa has never been an accident. It was a curated tool of dependency. If you can bribe a minister to sign away a mine, you don't need an army to steal the gold. By cutting off the foreign aid that once lubricated this corruption, Traoré has effectively started a fire to smoke out the rats. But rats are resilient, and they know how to hide in the cracks of a new administration. The tension in the capital is palpable. The people see the machines and they know the gold is theirs, but they also know the history of betrayal. They watch the young captain not just to see what he builds, but to see who he punctulates. The victory in the mines was the easy part. The war against the internal rot is a battle where the front lines are invisible. If this wealth is diverted, if the gold bars are traded for luxury cars in the hands of a new elite, then the revolution is nothing more than a change of masters. Yet, even as this internal struggle intensifies, a more immediate crisis looms. Gold is heavy, but it is not edible. You can buy 1,000 bulldozers with the profits of a nationalized mine, but you cannot feed a village with a yellow metal. The sanctions have not just targeted the banks, they have targeted the flow of grain. The global order is waiting for the moment the stomach of the nation rebels against the pride of the leader. They believe that eventually the hunger will force the captain back to the negotiating table, begging for the very aid he so publicly rejected. Ibrahim Traore knows this. He knows that his gold-backed sovereignty is a house of cards if the bread is still imported from the hands of his enemies. The machines were the first step, a physical manifestation of wealth returned. But those machines must now be turned toward the soil. The paradox remains. A nation that produces gold but imports rice is still a slave. The cliffhanger is no longer about where the money came from, but about whether that money can be converted into life before the clock runs out. He has the steel and he has the gold. But the rains are coming, and the people are waiting to see if they will be planting seeds of independence or seeds of a new disaster. The struggle for the stomach is the final frontier of dignity. The machines have moved from the parade grounds to the mud. It is one thing to line up steel for a camera. It is quite another to use that steel to break a cycle of starvation that has lasted for half a century. Ibrahim Traore understands that gold is merely a tool and roads are merely paths. If those paths only lead to markets filled with foreign grain, then the nation is still walking in circles. The second loop closes not in a bank vault, but in the furrows of the Sahelian earth. For decades, Burkina Faso was told that its soil was a graveyard, too dry and too weary to support its own people. This was the narrative of the dependency machine, a story designed to keep the ports of the West busy and the stomachs of the Sahel empty. Under the young captain, the battle has shifted to the fields. The machines are now carving out irrigation canals, pushing back the encroaching desert, and clearing land that was once abandoned to the dust. This is the community development program in its rawest form. It is not a pilot project funded by an NGO with a 3-year window and a glossy brochure. It is a state-led assault on hunger. Across the provinces, the government is distributing seeds and equipment not as charity, but as a strategic investment in national security. When you watch a farmer in a remote village receive the tools to double his harvest, you are not watching a humanitarian act. You are watching the dismantling of a weapon. Hunger has always been the most effective weapon of control. The reaction from the people has been a mixture of disbelief and a slow burning pride. In the rural heartlands, where the central government was once seen only when it was time to collect taxes, the arrival of these state-funded agricultural projects has changed the atmospheric pressure. You see it in the hands of the women who are now tilling communal plots with improved seeds. Their hands are cracked from the sun, but they move with a new purpose. They are no longer waiting for a truck with a foreign logo to bring them their daily bread. They are growing it. This is the show, don't tell, of sovereignty. One does not need to lecture a hungry man on the benefits of independence if he is currently eating the wheat grown in his own backyard. If this channel has moved you, consider becoming a member. Not for perks, but because supporting this directly supports narratives mainstream media refuses to tell. Every membership is a vote for Burkina-led's mission. However, this path is not without its thorns. The international community, while publicly silent on the agricultural success, is privately uneasy. When a nation becomes food sovereign, it loses its status as a reliable customer for global surpluses. The reaction from the institutions of power has been to tighten the screws of the embargo. If they cannot starve the nation through neglect, they will try to isolate it through policy. We see the pressure mounting in the diplomatic circles of West Africa. Some neighboring leaders look at Burkina Faso with a quiet envy, while others view it with a fear that is almost hysterical. They fear that their own people will look across the border and ask why their own fertile lands are still lying fallow while the Sahelian dust is turning green. This is where the multidimensional response becomes clear. There are those who see Traoré as a light, a young leader who has finally found the courage to say no to the crumbs. Then there are the skeptics, the ones who believe that this is a temporary fever that will break once the mechanical parts begin to wear out and the sanctions begin to truly bite. And then there is the most dangerous group, the institutional elite within the region who see a successful, independent Burkina Faso as a death sentence for their own way of life. They have spent 40 years building careers on the management of poverty. If Traoré eliminates poverty through production, their entire world becomes obsolete. The role of power and institutions is now the pivot point. Organization A, the regional bloc, has maintained a stance of icy distance, often acting as a middleman for the interests of the old colonial masters. Organization B, the global financial bodies, has responded with a deafening silence, waiting for the first sign of a failed harvest to re-enter the frame with a rescue package that comes with the old chains attached. But the young captain has countered this by turning inward. He is focused on the endogenous development model where the people themselves are the primary shareholders. By involving the military in the construction of schools and the tilling of fields, he has blurred the lines between defense and development. Yet, as the green shoots of Luami and rice begin to cover the red earth, a new tension is rising. The closure of the second loop has revealed a third, more intimate struggle. Traoré has reclaimed the gold and he has reclaimed the soil, but he is now moving toward a confrontation with the ghosts of the past that live within his own ranks. The pressure of the embargo and the weight of the national expectation have created a pressure cooker environment. Some of his closest allies are beginning to feel the strain of being outcasts in the global system. They are faced with a choice. Do they stay the course of total independence, or do they look for a quiet way to compromise with the old powers? The cliffhanger of this stage is no longer about the external enemy. It is about the choice of the brother. Traoré has given his people a taste of dignity, but dignity is a heavy burden to carry when the rest of the world is trying to make you invisible. He is standing on the edge of a great confrontation, not with a foreign army, but with the very structures of authority that have governed the continent for a century. The machines are working, the fields are growing, but the shadows in the capital are lengthening. The ultimate test of his leadership will not be his ability to fight the desert, but his ability to survive the betrayal of those who are tired of being brave. The final confrontation is approaching, and it will happen not on a battlefield, but in the heart of the movement itself. The shadows in the capital did not stay long. Ibrahim Traore knew that a nation reclaiming its gold and its grain would eventually have to face its own mirror. The final loop closes not with a grand speech, but with a quiet surgical cleaning of the house. For decades, the greatest theft in the Sahel was not committed by foreign corporations alone. It was facilitated by a class of professional gatekeepers who turned the struggle of the people into a private bank account. They were the ones who managed the donor funds, the ones who signed the lopsided mining leases, and the ones who grew wealthy while the provinces withered. Under the young captain, the drug of foreign aid was cut off, and with it, the oxygen for these parasites. By forcing the state to live on its own revenues, Traoré has created a system of radical visibility. When the money comes from the people's gold, the people demand to see where it goes. This is why the 764 machines are so significant. They are not just tools for the road, they are physical evidence that the money did not vanish into an offshore account or a luxury villa in a foreign capital. The war on corruption in Burkina Faso is being won through the sheer weight of iron and the green of the fields. You cannot hide a stolen hospital. You cannot embezzle 1,000 hectares of wheat. This is the governance of the visible, a stark contrast to the secrecy that defined the era of dependency. Right where you're watching from, your city, your corner of the world. Burkina Led sends each of you a heartfelt wish. May your journey be filled with dignity, hope, and light. The actual consequences of this path are now measurable in the lives of the ordinary citizens. We see a reduction in the price of basic staples as the local harvests reach the markets. We see the expansion of the national transport fleet, allowing the isolated north to finally speak to the south without the permission of a foreign logistics company. But these gains are fragile. The risk of the future lies in the intensity of the isolation. If Burkina Faso is the only one to stand, the weight of the global system may eventually become too much to bear. The international powers are watching, waiting for a single crack in the resolve. They know that if this model succeeds, it will ignite a fire across the continent that no amount of foreign aid can extinguish. What we are witnessing is the birth of a new political imagination. It is the realization that the fragility of Africa was a manufactured condition, a ghost story told to keep a continent in its place. Ibrahim Traore has shown that even a landlocked nation, surrounded by conflict and choked by sanctions, can find the resources to build its own future if it has the courage to stop the looting. The machines are working, the gold is staying, and the people are eating. The paradox of the Sahel is being solved by a young man who chose the dignity of the struggle over the comfort of the cage. What you've just heard isn't simply history. It's a reminder that sovereignty, dignity, and hope are still alive. If this moved you, subscribe. Not for numbers, but because we're building a space where voices of independence are honored. 1,000 days from now, the world may look back at this moment as the point where the tide finally turned. 764 machines, one nation, and a single, unshakable will to be free. Ibrahim Traore may not be the end of the story, but he is certainly the beginning of a new chapter. You may not remember the specific model of every excavator, but you will remember the day the earth moved under the feet of a people who were told they could never stand. What would you choose if your dignity was on the line? Would you take the loan or would you take the shovel? As we conclude this journey, the name of Ibrahim Traore remains etched into the red soil of the Sahel. His work in Burkina Faso is a testament to the fact that independence is not a gift to be received, but a prize to be seized. The gold is yours, the land is yours, the future is yours. Ibrahim Traore has paved the way, but it is the people of Burkina Faso who must walk it. In the end, sovereignty is not a destination, it is a daily act of courage.